Hello and welcome to this short masterclass on presentation skills. My name is Sarah Brooks. I have been standing up and speaking in front of audiences of people since I was 16 years old. That's quite a long time ago now. And I can assure you that feeling apprehensive and nervous is perfectly natural. But with some techniques and tips and some good preparation, you can present confidently and professionally and build your skills. What we are going to cover in this workshop, we're going to begin with the foundations, looking at how you structure a presentation and what needs to go into the planning and preparation stages. We're going to have a look at some ways in which you can engage your audience, make them want to sit up and listen and stay listening to your presentation. Looking at the mechanics, the physiological side of things, how you manage your body language, the sound and the tone of your voice, and also the words and phrases that we're using, the language. We're going to have a quick look at the effective use of visual aids, and then finish with ways in which you can develop your confidence. So let's start right at the very beginning, the structure of a presentation. Any presentation that you give should have a very simple structure to it. It should have a beginning, it should have a middle, and it should have an end. So when you're pulling your information together and starting to structure a presentation, just keep this shape in mind, the diamond shape. And as long as you've got that in your mind, you won't go far wrong. It should have a nice, sharp, pointy beginning, a middle section where you impart the information and the key themes that you want your audience to walk away with, and then it should draw to a nice close. So let's go through each section in turn. The first thing you should do at the beginning of a presentation is introduce yourself and the subject. So put a slide at the beginning that's got the title of your presentation on it, some nice visuals, but also your name, so they know who is speaking to them. You will also need to give your audience some directions. If it's a face-to-face presentation you're doing, how to evacuate the room if there's an emergency and where the toilets are. How long people are going to be sitting and listening to your presentation. If it's an online presentation, how to use the tools and technologies. You also might want to give your audience some direction in engaging with you. If you're okay to be interrupted and ask questions, then state that at the beginning. If you want to ask a question, just put your hand up and ask. But a lot of people don't want to be interrupted, so direct your audience. Say to them, if you wouldn't mind leaving any questions until the end of the presentation, there will be a chance for questions and answers. So whatever is your preference, direct them. As part of the introduction to yourself, you will also need to establish your credibility. What gives you the right to stand up and speak to this audience on this subject? What is your experience? What is your area of expertise? What is your knowledge in this subject? When you get into the main body of your presentation, you will also need to maintain your credibility by making sure that any information you're going to impart, any data or any facts has been checked so that it is current and up to date. There will always be one person in the audience that says, "Excuse me, did you not read the newspapers this morning?" And something about what you're saying has been superseded by changes that are happening. So just make sure you've checked it. We're now into the main body of the presentation. And this is where things need to flow in a logical order. So think about the very basics of the subject that you're talking about. You may have a mixed range of knowledge in your audience, and we need to make sure that everybody starts from the same level. So start with some background, some introductory information, establishing the basic bits of knowledge. And then as you go through your presentation, you build. You add, and you develop. So when we get towards the end of the presentation, we can talk about the more complex things. If we start with the complicated stuff at the beginning, it won't make sense and your audience will not understand what you're talking about. So you need to develop their knowledge throughout the presentation. Another way of making sure that things flow with a logical structure is to impart the information as it happens in chronological order. If we switch things about a bit and things go in the wrong order, then it doesn't make sense to the audience. So just make sure that things flow. Throughout your presentation, you want to maintain the engagement of your audience and also to make sure that they are understanding the key points that you are making. So one way of doing that is to illustrate what you are saying with examples, and examples that are relevant and current. If you're trying to explain something that's quite complicated or quite technical, using the phrase, a good example of this would be, and that will enable your audience to go, oh, yeah, I get what you're saying. That makes sense now. We can also use stories or anecdotes to engage the audience and keep them on track with us and make it memorable. Once you have delivered all of the key pieces of information that you want your audience to understand, we then need to draw things to a close. So you can provide a recap of the key agenda points that you've covered, or you can summarize the information. If it's an argument that you're presenting, you might want to draw conclusions at that point. And then we need to thank our audience for listening and invite any questions. And by doing that, it will draw it to a natural close, and you will never have to use the phrase, that's it, I've finished, because your audience will already know. By saying, thank you very much for your attention and listening. Does anybody have any questions? They will burst into a round of applause, and then the hands will go up around the room to ask any questions. And that draws it to a nice close rather than it falling off the end of a cliff. So now let's have a look at the planning and preparation that goes in before you stand up and deliver your presentation. So this is everything that happens before you open your mouth. Let's look at planning first of all. I put a plan together. I write down what I'm going to talk about. And the starting point of that is what subject, what topic am I delivering? And once I've got that, before I do anything else, I do my research. I pull together all the information. I look at what's happening currently in that area. Have there been any changes or developments since the last time I looked at this subject or piece of knowledge? And once I've collected and gathered together all my information, I then start to put it into some kind of order. And the first thing I need to think about is, what is the aim of this presentation? When my audience leave, what do I want them to walk away with? And that is the aim of this presentation. Underneath that, what are the objectives? So these would be the key themes or the areas of knowledge that I'm going to cover within that subject, and put them in some kind of logical order that makes sense. And that can then become the agenda that we deliver. Part of my planning is to consider who is going to be sitting in the audience, who's likely to turn up. And you can make an overarching statement about the kind of people who are going to be there, but then we need to think about what is called differentiation. So that is the breadth of knowledge or experience. So you may have somebody who knows nothing about this subject, and in the same room, you have somebody who considers themselves an expert, and everywhere in between. So when we are delivering our information, we need to take account of that and making sure that we are not talking over the heads and explaining things in a too complex way for the people with no knowledge to be able to understand, but not patronizing the people who know a lot. So I would excuse at the beginning, for those of you that know a lot, just bear with me while I just make sure that those who know nothing have got the basic foundations of knowledge that they need. So that's what we mean by differentiation, what different types of people are going to be in there and what different levels of knowledge and understanding. A timeline. How long have you been given to speak? If it is a 30-minute presentation, what are you going to say in the first 5 minutes? Then the next 5 minutes, then a 10-minute section, and then another 5 minutes, and then start to draw things to a close. You need to practice your timings, because if you have been given a slot and you're one of a number of guest speakers, if the timings don't work, then you're going to push the whole agenda out. So come up with a timeline, but make sure it's reasonable to impart that level of detail and knowledge within that amount of time. What resources will you need to support your presentation? I like to have some kind of visual aids, PowerPoint being probably the most common one that people use. That supports me. It keeps me online. It gives me the information, what's coming next, keeps me on track, but it also is a nice visual focal point for the audience to look at. But other resources might include handouts, takeaway booklets, examples of things, props that you want to use. So any resources to support what you're saying. And then finally, any takeaways. So this is the thing that they walk out of the room with. Do you need to signpost them? Do you want them to contact you? If so, what are your contact details? Are there any relevant books or websites that would support and further develop their understanding of the knowledge? Once we've pulled everything together, we now need to start preparing. Now, I don't work from a script. I'm not reading, but I do write a script. It helps me pull together all my thoughts, but it also creates muscle memory. If I've written it down, then I'm going to remember what I've got to say. If you are, however, delivering a speech, then you will read it verbatim from a script, but a presentation tends to be a little bit more free-flowing. So you might want to use notes, and these would just be the key prompts that make sure that you talk about the key areas. If there are any statistics or dates or facts that you struggle to remember, make sure you've made a note of those, but have them in a manageable format. Small little cue cards are quite useful. Keeps them small and manageable. If you've got it written down as a full script, you will lose your place halfway through. I've done that before, and you've got loads of pieces of paper and they're rattling around in front of you. So try and convert your script into a notes, some format that works for you. Put together the visual aids that you want to use. What I tend to do is use my visual aids as the notes. So the bullet points that are coming up on here, they're prompting me what comes next. So they work quite well and they take the place of notes for me. But some people like to have notes. It's a comfort to them. Once you've put the script and the visuals together, practice. Practice delivering your presentation. It helps with the time scales to make sure you can fit it all in. But also, does it flow naturally? How do the words bounce off one another? Are there any bits that you keep forgetting that you need to work on? So practice delivering. Part of my preparation is also to check out, either if it's a face-to-face presentation, the venue. I always arrive at least half an hour early. How is the room set up? Is the technology working, the visual aids? Check it out, arrive early, make sure you know the lie of the land when you get there. If it's an online presentation, I start it early and I go through, I have a little practice, making sure that all my technology is in the right place. I've got my slides open, I know how to share things, and any extra supporting engagement tools, are they all working? So beforehand, either check out the venue or check out the technology. Calms the nerves a little bit. If you arrive 5 minutes before you're due to speak, ooh, a little bit flustered. Consider any accessibility or special provision you may need to make for your audience members, and that can be judged through the joining instructions. You can ask people if they have any special requirements you need to make. Finally, prepare and produce the material and your handouts, and then you've got everything ready and you're good to go. So a few tips and hints on engagement techniques. How can you make your audience want to sit up and listen and want to keep listening to your presentation? Here are a few of the ones that I use. First of all, illustration and animation. This comes in a number of different forms. if you've got good visuals and they've got really nice photographs on things like that, that will illustrate the points that you're trying to make. But illustration comes in other forms, your body language and your voice. You can illustrate what you're saying by the expression on your face, the sound and the tone of your voice. So if you are talking about something that is dark and frightening and a little bit scary, then you can make your face look frightened and you can make your voice sound a little bit frightened as well. But if you're talking about something that is warm and sunny and we've got rainbows and blue skies, then you can illustrate that with your voice and your body language by going outwards instead of inwards. So that's what we mean by illustration and animation. It's adding depth to the words that you're saying by adding emotion to it. Audience interaction is a very good way of making people sit up and listen. I like to ask my audience questions. I like to understand who I've got in my audience at the beginning, and I'll say, right, let's have a show of hands. Who thinks they know nothing about this subject? Who thinks they know a little bit about it? Who thinks they're an expert? And now I know who I've got in my audience, but also they're talking to me and they feel part of the presentation. General questions with hands up is quite a gentle way of going. But I can ask my audience an open question. And does anybody know the answer to this question? If so, put your hands up. Okay, I'm going to come to you. Give me a bit more information on that. If it's an online presentation, I use the chat function. I ask an open question to my audience. I get the answers in the chat, and then I say, oh, that's an interesting point that you've made there. Pop your microphone on and tell me a bit more about that. It's a very good way of making your audience feel part of your presentation, but also getting them to sit up and listen. They might get asked a question. There are some excellent online engagement tools around at the moment. They're being developed all the time, and they make things a little bit different and a little bit fun. You can download an app. There's a few different ones. Slido is the one that I'm using quite a lot at the moment. I can create a quiz. I can create a word cloud. I can do a multiple answer question. I can get percentages, gauge audiences' reactions to things. And we simply create the question by using QR codes. You get the audience to use their smartphones. They can send you words and phrases, and you can create an audience reaction in a very visual form. So that's a really good way currently of getting your audience involved in the presentation. The use of examples, I've mentioned this before. It's a very good way of making sure that your audience are keeping track of what you're saying and are able to connect the points that you're talking about with their world. What does that mean to them? So using examples to illustrate, very, very good way of making sure that the audience are grasping what you're saying. And then finally, stories. The use of stories or anecdotes. There is science behind this. Professors have studied the human brain using MRI scanners, and what they have noticed is when they tell stories, when they provide information in a story format, then the whole of the brain lights up and the audience members start to feel emotionally connected with the person that's telling the story and the information that they're giving. It also makes it very memorable. So telling stories that have characters and has good and then bad things happening, and there's a bit of jeopardy along the way, but we might end up with a happy ending. That just makes it a little bit more interesting to listen to and memorable. So now let's think about the mechanics, the body language. Let's start with that, the visual impression that you create. I'm going to break this down into two halves. First of all, face-to-face. So in an in-room presentation where you've got an audience there with you. Posture. The posture is dictated by your spine. And as soon as I say that to people, people sit up straight. They think about their posture. The shape of your spine sends messages out to the rest of the world and to your audience. So thinking about the shape of your spine, you should have your feet firmly planted on the floor, about hip width apart. That gives you a nice solid foundation. Don't be tempted to cross your ankles because it makes you a little bit rocky and you can fall over. Once you've got your feet firmly planted, then what we can do is we can think about that posture. And you can elongate your spine, lift your head up, you push your shoulders back, and you talk to your audience, and it sends a message. It says, I feel confident to be here. If you pull your shoulders in and you drop your head down, then it makes you look not quite so confident. The message you're sending is, oh, I'm a little bit afraid. And if we go too much, then it looks like you're looking down on your audience. So just that nice neutral chin parallel to the floor sends a very confident message. Movement. By all means, move, but make sure that you're not moving too much. And position again, don't move in front of the screen that is behind you. If you've got some beautiful visuals going on, but you're standing in front of it, your audience can't see them. So just think about the position in relation to your visuals and how you're going to move. You might want to turn around and point at something on the screen if it's relevant. You might want to move around a little bit. But I was once part of an audience where there were rows of chairs separated by an aisle down the middle, and the presenter walked up and down and up and down and up and down, and it was very distracting. And we couldn't see their face, we couldn't hear what they were saying. So that then brings us on to the facial expression. You should make facial contact with your audience. More people than you will ever know use lip reading as their way of accessing information. And if they can't see your face and they can't see your mouth moving, they can't hear what you're saying. So make facial contact and smile to engage your audience. Unless, of course, it's a very serious presentation, in which case smiling might not be appropriate. But generally speaking, a warm, friendly smile makes your audience feel as though they warm to you, and it's a very happy place to be. Facial contact or eye contact connects you with your audience. If it's a small room, you can talk to the individuals within the room. If it's a bigger room, then what you do is you zone. If it's a lecture theatre, you talk to the people over there, and then you talk to the people over there, then you talk to the people in the middle, and you move it around. So everybody at some point feels as though they're getting a piece of you, they're connecting with you. And use your hands and your arms. Express yourself. Underline what you're saying. Don't just stand there with them rigid at your side. Or if you are in front of an audience and you're holding yourself, a lot of tension through here, and it shows nerves and anxiety. So relax the shoulders and use your hands. Use them to express what you're saying. Now let's have a look at the online stuff. Equally important. It's okay if you're at home and part of the audience member and you're sat on your sofa and you've got your laptop on the coffee table. Not okay if you're the presenter. And it's not a very flattering look, looking down into a laptop camera that's lower than you. So I've got a really big desk. It's quite deep. So I push my laptop a long way so that you get a full head and shoulders shot and you can see my hands moving. I've also got the camera angle at right angles to me so that it's straight on to my face. So you might want to, if you've not got such a big desk, lift things up a bit, put books or files underneath your camera, just so that it's straight on to your head shot. And posture is just as important when you're doing an online presentation as it is when you're doing a face-to-face one. So I'm sitting on quite a high stool, my back is straight, my chin is parallel to the floor, and I'm talking straight to the camera. I'm smiling because I want you to engage with me and I want you to feel that you're warm and you're welcome when you're in my presence. And I'm moving my upper body. I'm expressing myself. I'm using my hands. And to make eye contact on a screen, best thing to do is talk to the picture of yourself, I have found. You may need to look away from time to time, and I've noticed that when I do these recordings, because I'm seeing what's on the screen, so I'm reading what's happening. So I will need to look away from time to time, but talking to the picture of yourself is the best way of making eye contact. Now let's think about the tone of your voice. Variation and interest is the way to make it sound engaging. So variation and interest. Let's look at the two things that you can vary. First of all, your pace. This is the speed with which you deliver your words. And the speed is dictated by the gaps between the words. The longer the gap, the slower you speak. The shorter the gap, the faster you speak. And then the words start to run into one another and you get very, very fast and you can't pick one word from another because it's all going too quickly. So pace. What we need is a nice steady pace, tiny little bit slower than you would if you were having a normal conversation when you're standing up and speaking. But if it's all at the same pace all the way through, that can start to sound a bit dull. So we need to vary that pace. So sometimes we'll speed up a little bit if it's an exciting thing we're talking about, and sometimes we'll slow down. And then we might pause and then deliver a line, especially if it's a funny one. A pause before a funny makes it comic timing. So variation in pace. Also, variation in pitch. Pitch is the note that you hit. Some people have a higher pitched voice, some people have a lower pitched voice. You will have a natural area that's comfortable for you, but variation going up when things are light and when things are airy and sunny, and then coming down when things are dangerous and dark. That's the way we vary the pitch. A lower pitch voice does tend to carry further. So if you want to really project your voice, going down in your register helps you project to a bigger audience, and you don't always need a microphone, and that's going down in your register. And that's what variation and interest is. It's combining those two, and that's what illustrates what you're talking about and adds that emotion to it. The other thing is to enunciate your words. Each word should stand on its own. That's going to help people who don't have English as a first language, or the language that you present in. If they don't have that as their first language, enunciating each word helps people understand what you're saying if it's not their first language. But also if people have a hearing impairment, enunciating the words would also help them with lip reading. Language, the words and phrases that we use. I've said plain English, whatever language you present in, the plain version of that. If you have an audience of experts in the field, then by all means use technical jargon. But there may be somebody that's new that doesn't understand all the jargon. So as far as we can, try and strip out the complex and use simplified, plain versions of the language that you're using. Because we don't want to blind people with science, and we would like our audience to understand what we're talking about. So making sure that we have simplified and stripped out any really complicated stuff. If you are going to use acronyms, so initials that represent a longer version, use the long version in full and put it on a slide, but then the shorter version in brackets afterwards. So an example of this would be, I do qualifications for the Institute of Leadership and Management, who are called the ILM. From the minute I've said the Institute of Leadership Management, known as the ILM, I can use ILM going forwards. But just using acronyms and not explaining what they are, your audience will be sitting there thinking, I have no idea what you're talking about. So explain it. There are a number of repeat words that people use. These are some of the usual subjects, like obviously, kind of, sort of, basically, actually, umming and erring. They're filler words. They don't add any value. They tend to get in the way. And if you use them too much, they become a verbal tick. And your audience will just be waiting for the next time you say that word. I gave some feedback on a presentation not long ago. And in a 10-minute presentation, somebody used the word obviously 18 times. It was very repetitive. And the thing is, if it was obvious, you wouldn't need to stand up and say it. So just be aware of them. Awareness is the first step of getting rid of them. So let's just have a little brief think about visual aids. I think most people are familiar with the phrase death by PowerPoint. It comes in a number of different forms. I have seen it where there's just too many slides, and everything that the presenter is saying is on the slides. A colleague of mine who was moving into the learning and development world came to see me with a course that they had written. It was an hour-long workshop, and for an hour workshop, they had developed 130 slides. That's more than 2 a minute, way too much. So I said, edit, cut, cull, go through, get rid of them. So that's one version of death by PowerPoint. And somebody just reading off slides is another version. But things that are too busy, that's another. You need to consider the font of the text that you are using. So I've got here, as an example, a very, very busy background. And the font, the type that's on it, is very similar in colour to some of those background colours, which means that it doesn't stand out. So contrast. The greatest degree of contrast is white background with black writing on it, or the other way round. But that can look a bit dull. So we like to colour things up a little bit, but just be very, very careful of the colours green with yellow and red, because some people find it difficult to differentiate those colours. So never put red with yellow with green together. Some people can't see it. Don't be tempted to put a spreadsheet on a slide. It doesn't work. Nobody can see the detail. If you need to impart data information, then take that and put it into a graph, a bar chart or a pie chart. If you do want your audience to have that level of detail, give them a handout with it on so that they can look at it. But if it's on a screen, it's just numbers and people won't be able to pick out the key points. So either enlarge a small section of it and highlight it, or give it in a different form. If you're going to use visuals, make sure that they're professional. If you've got a library of pictures that you can use those. PowerPoint have some really good ones that you can just download nowadays, and we purchase packages of visual images for us to use. And just to pick up on that death by PowerPoint thing, I hope I make my point just by simply going through this slide. Bullet points should be used to provide a short summary of the key points that you are aiming to make. You, as the presenter, should provide the detail in your narrative. If you use the bullet points on your screen as your script, your audience will very quickly lose interest in listening to you. Also, they can read 4 to 7 times more quickly than you can speak. So they will get to the end of your words before you do. There is little point in having you as the presenter if all you are going to do is read from the screen. You might as well just send them the PowerPoint and let them read it for themselves. Your slides should act as a prompt to provide focus and to keep you on track, and also to act as a focal point for your audience and a visual illustration of the points you are trying to make. The next slide has been edited and I've added animation. So rather than having all of the text on the screen at once, I'm going to reveal it one point at a time, and I have cut the number of words by about 60%, but they mean the same. And just by revealing them one at a time, you get away from that I am just reading off the screen and giving you death by PowerPoint. I'm just looking at the bullet points and I'm thinking, what story can I tell behind that bullet point so that you don't lose interest? And I know that you can read faster than I can talk, so I need to slow you down and I need to keep you on track and just take you to the point where I want you to be. So this is the reveal, the animation. So by one click, I can just put the next line up. So I'm not just reading off the screen, and neither are you. I do like to use my slides to prompt me. They are my notes. I use them, they keep me on track, and they give focus to what I'm saying. And also it gives the audience something to look at. So the more images you can put up there, the prettier you can make it, the more photographs or graphs you can use, the more engaging your presentation is going to be. So finally, thinking about building your confidence. What I would advise you to do is to start small and then build. My first ever experience of standing up and speaking in public was a 5-minute presentation on a subject of my choice. I wrote it all down in a script. I had it on an A4 piece of paper in front of me and it rattled around. And after 2 minutes, I lost my place. And after 3 minutes, I was finished and I hadn't given most of the information I'd written down. And I thought, I'm never going to be able to do this. But then they made me do it again. And I practiced. And then I did it a little bit bigger. And then I did something a bit longer. And eventually I got to the point where I felt reasonably confident. I still get nervous. And I think the day I stop getting nervous, I should stop doing this because it means I don't care anymore. But if you start small, then you can build. If you've never done this before, don't start with a half-hour presentation on a really complicated subject. Most of your confidence will come from good planning and good preparation. If you've put a solid plan together, if you've written a script and you've practiced it, and you're confident with the technology that you're using, and you feel that you know the information and you could answer questions on it, then that's going to make you feel a lot more confident. So put more effort into the planning and the preparation and practice. If you've got a friendly colleague that you can practice with, you could record it and watch it back to find the development areas. That's quite an uncomfortable thing for most people to do. But if you've got a friendly volunteer that you can practice with and they can give you some feedback and give you some points for improvement or make you feel good about it as well. But the more you practice, the more you will create muscle memory. It'll stay in your head and you'll know what comes next. It doesn't matter if you miss the odd word here or there, as long as you've delivered the key points. And that's what practice will give you. But most importantly, find what works for you. I've done a number of different things over the years. I used to record myself and then play it back to myself when I was in the car, so it would create that memory. I used to write full scripts and then transfer it into notes and use the notes. Over a period of time, I gradually lost the notes. I don't use them anymore. But it's what works for you. And also, present as your natural self. Present your natural style. Don't try and be something that you're not. So a quick recap on all of the subjects that we've covered. We started at the beginning looking at the structure, the presentation diamond, making sure it's got a good beginning, plenty of middle in a logical order, and it draws to a nice close. The things that you need to consider when you're preparing and planning for any preparation, any engagement tools that you can use to make your audience sit up and listen and stay listening, how we manage the mechanics, the physiology, the facial expression, the body language, the posture, the sound and the tone of our voice, and the words and phrases that we use. Think about the visual aids, make sure that they are supportive and engaging and not distracting. And find ways to develop your confidence. Volunteer, put your hand up. The more you do it, the easier it gets. And the more confident you become, and the more you find your own style and develop ways of growing and becoming a better presenter. So thank you very much for your attention and for listening. I hope you have found that useful. If you have got any comments or questions you want to make, or you want to talk about this further, get in touch. My name's Sarah Brooks. I run a small training company. We're called Abbeydale Training. And if you would like to talk to us, then do get in touch. But thank you very much for listening and good luck.